Shalom and welcome to the weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Hebrew. We're continuing our study in Jeremiah's temple sermon from Jeremiah chapter 7, looking today at verse 4. In verse 3, God had called the people through Jeremiah to amend their ways and their deeds, and God would allow them to continue living in the land. And here we're going to get to one of the main emphases of the temple message in verse 4. Let's go ahead and read it in Hebrew as we get started. Al tivtechu lachem el divrei hasheker lemor Heikal Adonai, Heikal Adonai, Heikal Adonai Hema. So we start off with this little negation. This is our more immediate negation as opposed to lo. And it's attached to what is here an imperfect. It's actually a jussive, because it's being used with this negation. So we have a tau at the beginning and u at the end. So this is going to be as an imperfect, or in this case, a jussive to mp. It's a cal from our verb batach, which means to trust. So with the negation, this would be do not trust, or even with the nuance more immediately of stop trusting for yourselves. Now, this is something that's usually not translated into English. This lamed here with sort of a reflexive pronoun. This is actually called the reflexive lamed. I think Williams calls this an ethical dative with sort of a centripetal force, because it brings it back to the speaker over here. You're trusting for yourselves because you are involved with the process of trusting, obviously, but most of our translations do not translate it at all. But you see the emphasis and the force that it's bringing. So stop trusting for yourselves to words of actually the words of the lie, because you have an article over here. This is words plural in a construct, so we also have this is definite over here. So the words of the lie, the words of the deception. Well, what exactly are the words of the lie and the words of the deception? Well, we're going to find out. Saying, so this is just a lamed. We're used to seeing the lemor, lamed with an infinitive construct, but basically it opens the quotes, so to speak, so we can start the quote over here of what it is they're actually saying. And what are they saying? Heikal Adonai, temple of the Lord. Oh, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, these. Now these sometimes it raises some questions, because if it's the temple of the Lord, it should be singular. This is the temple, but this may refer to the whole complex of the temple buildings. You know, they're coming through the gates, and they're coming into the temple precinct, so there may be more than just the main building of the temple there. But in any case, this whole complex is the temple of the Lord. So now the interesting thing is that it is true that this is the temple of the Lord. This is the temple of Yahweh, the temple of Yahweh. And yet Jeremiah says, or God says through Jeremiah, that these are words of the lie, words of the deception. Because obviously in the context here, the people think that as long as God's temple is here, everything is fine. And to put trust just in the outward structure or the outward trappings of their religion and faith, without the inner, both the inner conviction and relationship with God, as well as the outflowing pattern of conduct in life that's supposed to come from it, just having the externals does not count, and it becomes an illusion, thinking that because the externals are there, the internal relationship is good. We're going to see how it's translated here. Let's go ahead and hide our work and look at a couple of translations. First of all, most of the translation is going to be pretty literal for the most part, except, again, they don't usually translate this ethical dative here. But let's look at a couple that develop it a little bit more, almost into a paraphrase you're going to see in some of the others. First of all, in the Jewish Publication Society, their Tanakh 1985 edition, don't put your trust in illusions. So stop trusting for yourselves to words of the lie in illusions. That's actually a pretty good idea for it. Because there's no substance to what they're trusting in, and saying the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord are these, and then in brackets buildings are these buildings. This is probably a good explanation of what they're saying, but the word illusion is an interesting thing there. In the New English Bible from over in Britain, they've sort of reversed the two lines because they're picking up the second part first. You keep saying, this place is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. This catchword of yours, now that's obviously developed words of the lie. This catchword of yours is a lie. Put no trust in it. So they end with the beginning of the statement over here. This is actually it's a paraphrase that's kind of getting to the idea, just like an illusionary catchword. You can almost put those two together. And one more, New Living Translation, which is clearly a paraphrase again. And they're developing the idea, but I think they're getting it, well, with a little nuance here, you'll see. But don't be fooled by those who promise you safety simply because the Lord's temple is here. They chant, the Lord's temple is here, the Lord's temple is here. Now, the one thing I didn't care for too much is don't be fooled by those who promise you safety by using these words, or simply because the Lord's temple is there. This paraphrase here sort of puts the blame on those who are promising you safety, but there's nothing in the text that says that they're saying this because other people have promised them safety. It is true that the false prophets are doing and saying things like that. But the verse as it stands in Hebrew is clearly calling the people to take responsibility for these words and saying, don't trust in these deceptive words. You need to take responsibility for your own relationship with God. Here they seem to be pushing that over to those who are making this false promise and just warning the people, don't be fooled. So I think this weakens it a little bit, this paraphrase. It may be true, but I would prefer something that's putting the responsibility back directly on the people, which is what the Hebrew does and these other versions, and most of our standard versions do as well. Now, Jeremiah is going to develop this a little more in the following verses, so he's still just working up into his temple sermon here. So check back with us soon for our next edition of the weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Hebrew. Shalom.